Good morning and welcome to Weather Center. I'm Paul Emick. Hurricane George creeps closer to the U.S. coastline, and there's great concern over the thousands of people who've refused to leave the Florida Keys. And conditions are starting to slowly deteriorate there, and George is expected to slide through the lower Keys in the early morning hours. For a complete and current update on Hurricane George, we now turn to Jeff Morrow, standing by in our forecast center. Jeff?
Yeah, we're getting some new information in. We got the new advisory in from the National Hurricane Center, and we'll give that to you in just a moment. Not a lot of change going on with that at the present time. And when I talked to our meteorology supervisor here, Stu Ostro, he has some new wind observations, and we are getting tropical storm force winds right around the Keys, pretty much winds sustained there, and it won't be too long before we start to get some hurricane force gusts. All right, let's first of all go to the advisory and show you. This is the 2 a.m. advisory. I have right now the 3 a.m. advisory here, and these are the changes. It is now centered at 23.5 north and longitude 80.3 west. So this is 80.3 here and 23.5, about 120 miles southeast of Key West, Florida. The movement is the same. The wind speed is the same. The pressure is about 985 millibars in pressure. So again, still some signs of slow strengthening here. Let's show you where the watches and warnings are. There are no changes on those on the current advisory. And again, the red shaded areas along the west and east coast of Florida, including the Keys, anywhere south of Longboat Key and south of Deerfield Beach all the way down to Key West, those are hurricane warnings. And on the east coast up to Stewart and on the west coast up to Bayport, in between there and Longboat Key, those are the tropical storm warnings at the present time. Let's show you what it looked like in the Keys a little bit earlier this evening. This was the scene in Florida City, just south of the Homestead area. Rain bands have continued to move through South Florida from Hurricane George, and some of the downpours have been pretty heavy, but they don't last all that long. Also, some reports of possible isolated tornadoes, particularly in Dade and Monroe counties, have been brought in. No reports of any significant damage, but again, conditions are just generally deteriorating in these areas as we head through the overnight hours. Joining me now here in the forecast center is meteorology supervisor Stu Ostro, and again, not too much new on the advisory, Stu, pretty much holding its own but getting ever closer to the Keys.
And over the next couple of hours, the Hurricane Center undoubtedly will be continuing to evaluate the new satellite pictures, which we'll start getting in again shortly, right, and the radar and any more reports from the NOAA aircraft.
All right, and you have some wind reports there of some of the stations, automatic reporting stations?
Yeah, some of the offshore stations in the middle Keys are now having sustained winds in the, say, 45 to 50 mile per hour range with some gusts starting to get a little closer to 60 miles per hour.
All right, let's go ahead and take a look at a satellite perspective. And again, we don't have the very latest satellite imagery. We should be getting a new picture in at any time. But again, this shows that most of the heavy thunderstorm action is on the east side of the storm, and that really has been the case for much of the last day or two.
It has, and even back to when it made landfall in Puerto Rico, way back there, folks there know that after the eye went by, they had some of their worst weather, and it looks like that may yet continue to be the case as it heads across the Keys.
All right, and we have a Doppler radar, and this is really now our best tool to see exactly where the eye is, and it's very well defined here. And Stu, particularly on the south and east side, that eye wall really starting to form up.
It is. We see these yellows and oranges, and undoubtedly that is where not only some of the most intense rain is, but certainly the strongest winds right now, in general, being in the eye wall right around the eye, and we think probably right in this squall activity right there.
Okay, the Keys are here. This is Key West here, and of course we're going up here, Key Largo, about right in that area, Miami up to the north. But some of these bands, Stu, that are rotating in here, those are what are giving Sombrero Key and some of the other automatic reporting stations those 40 to 50 mile an hour sustained winds.
And even though they're sustained at that and gusting close to 60, it's probably in this band here where they're starting to increase more dramatically, and then at their strongest right around the center. If the eye continues at its present rate of speed, it would make its closest approach, the center of the circulation, make its closest approach late morning in the Keys, with the strongest winds really increasing rapidly several hours before that.
So as dawn breaks here in 4 or 5 hours, we're talking about some of the worst conditions yet It's not going to be very bright. There's going to be a lot of driving rain, a lot of wind out on those keys. And really, the road is closed there right now. You cannot get in or off of the keys at the present time.
No, and folks in the Keys who don't experience this very often might be surprised by how quickly conditions deteriorate as the eye approaches, both in terms of the wind and rain and the storm surge.
All right, now we have another satellite perspective here. And again, I wanted to use this. This is the hurricane down in the bottom right-hand part of your screen, and this is Florida. But the future movement here, Stu, in the next couple of days as we head into the weekend, we do expect this hurricane to head out into the Gulf of Mexico.
It will head out in somewhere in here, and then the question is, will it head more in this direction toward the north or more toward the northwest or somewhere in between? We're not sure yet, so everybody in and along here needs to follow the progress of the storm very closely.
All right, and we do anticipate that there will probably be some more intensification when that happens.
Yeah, there may even be some more intensification in the short term, and then perhaps even some more in the longer term.
All right, so just to wrap it up here, South Florida getting impacted slowly but surely by George's and the condition, or George, and the conditions will deteriorate as we head through the morning hours.
Yeah.
All right. Meteorology Supervisor Stu Ostro and I will be back in a half an hour to give you the very latest on George. But again, if you're away from your television, you can always get the latest at weather.com, our online service. Right now, let's go back to Paul Emick in the studio with a look at the rest of the nation's weather.
All right, thanks so much, Jeff. In addition to Hurricane George, we also have problems with some rain and potentially some strong to severe weather in parts of the plains. A little bit wet in parts of Minnesota, a little bit wet, too, in parts of Seattle and Portland, and built to stay that way. And way too cloudy. Clouds are still up overhead. San Francisco, even toward L.A. and San Diego. Expect our clouds to hold on during the day Friday. Could see some real problems here associated with Hurricane George. We often see some tornadoes as a possibility with a tropical system that close to land. Not at all uncommon to see that. Could see a risk of severe weather between now and noon as well into portions of Missouri, including Kansas City and St. Louis. Nothing severe being reported now, but quite wet too, kind of off the east of Kansas City and even closer toward St. Louis Metro. Some wet conditions are on the way. Also, around Cleveland, we're getting a little bit drier now. The rain kind of moved off from our south. Even Columbus, a few showers coming through, but toward Pittsburgh, a little wet. Minneapolis, we could see a sprinkle or two of our own. And in the Pacific Northwest, around Seattle and Portland, we've seen some sprinkles off and on. And you know what? We're going to continue that way throughout the day Friday. So it looks like we could be potentially wet yet here again. That's a big look at all the precipitation across the country. Heaviest amounts of heat, well, it was above average in parts of Texas, also in parts of New Mexico. High of 89 around Albuquerque, and even some, well, close to triple-digit readings in North Texas. High to 72 for L.A. and 69 toward New York City. Cooling just to 63 presently. A few clouds overhead and built to hold on for our day as well on Friday.
Well, the eye of Hurricane George is headed for the lower keys of Florida. Conditions are starting to deteriorate, and there is great concern for the thousands of people who refused to leave the area. Good morning and welcome to Weather Center. I'm Vivian Brown. We are closely tracking the movement of Hurricane George, and we now turn to Bruce Edwards in the Forecast Center for an update.
Thanks, Vivian, and good morning, everyone. Indeed, it is a very dangerous hurricane working its way across the Florida Straits, and the effects are already being felt in the Florida Keys. Satellite picture shows the circulation around the Hurricane George, encompassing South Florida and the entire Florida Straits, as well as much of Cuba this morning. Here's the latest update for the National Hurricane Center as of 3 a.m. Eastern Time. George was centered at 23.5 north, 80.3 west, or approximately 120 miles southeast of Key West, Florida. Top sustained winds have continued to grow slowly up to 90 miles per hour. It is continuing to move in that steady west-northwest track at about 14 miles per hour. Central pressure 986 millibars. Now the watches and warnings are posted all across South Florida and the islands. Of course, in the Bahamas, we have hurricane warnings out, and in the United States, the hurricane warnings now run from Longboat Key on the west coast all the way down, including the Keys, up to Deerfield Beach. That's where we have hurricane warnings in effect at the present time. Now north of Longboat Key up to Bayport on the west coast, and from Deerfield Beach up to Stewart, we have tropical storm warnings that are in effect at the present time. A very nasty situation developing here. Now, the effects were beginning to be felt across the Keys and South Florida last evening. This is the scene in Florida City on Thursday night. Now, that's just located just south of Homestead, Florida. And as you can see, rain bands associated with George are beginning to assault various areas. Isolated tornadoes are possible over the Florida Keys and portions of South Florida during the next 24 hours. That is indeed a severe threat. Again, we look at the watches and the warnings, and again, the wind field, tropical storm force winds are being felt in the Keys and over South Florida. The hurricane force winds still so far primarily to the east of the center. We welcome in one of our senior meteorologists, Stu Ostro, who's been tracking the storm all night long, and it has grown bigger. It is affecting the Keys with very, very squally weather, and there's some grave concern about those that decided that they were going to tough it out along the Keys.
Yeah, the emergency management folks did a great job encouraging everybody to leave, but unfortunately there were few folks left behind. And although things haven't been too bad yet on the Keys, that's about to go downhill as we head into the daylight hours.
Let's take a look at the satellite picture. First of all, we'll show you this, and then we'll give you some information if you're tuned in from Key West. You can see with the infrared satellite a lot of heavy weather showing up, high cloud tops to the northeast and east of the eye of the hurricane.
That has been one of the features actually throughout a good part of the last few days. To the east and southeast is where a lot of the heaviest weather is, and so as the eye comes by very close, if not over Key West, as we get into the late morning, folks there should realize that, let's say the eye goes over to them, goes overhead of them, the wind calms down, the worst weather may be yet to come, and even if the eye doesn't go over your location on the Keys, it's going to be a while before the hurricane onslaught decreases as the day gets a little later in the day.
We take a look at the latest Doppler radar, and we can see some of the heavier bands there, and still the biggest cluster is to the, as you mentioned, to the east of the eye wall. And if that eye does go just west of them, the entire lower middle Keys will bear the brunt of this storm because of, again, the counterclockwise circulation. That's where all the energy is moving at this time.
As well as the water being pushed on shore by the winds. The storm surge will be part of this too.
And of course, with the, we're talking about, what, 4 to 6 feet storm surge? Is that?
Yeah, 4 to 7 feet, assuming it's at its present intensity. If it were to intensify a little bit more, that could be a little higher.
And of course, that's still quite possible. It's over warm waters. And as I recall now, if my facts and figures are right, I think the highest elevation on Key West, for example, is about 14 feet above sea level. So we are talking some, a lot of wash, a lot of water and waves on top of water crashing on into the islands. Now, we were talking earlier that there are some respites in Key West yet, the refuge shelters. There's a look at them. And this is, explain to us, for those that are uninitiated, exactly what these represent.
These are places that folks can go if things start getting hairy, and they may very well do that. The Upper Keys Coral Shores High School, Marathon, Stanley, Switlick Elementary School, Key West Glen Archer Elementary School, and these are not formal shelters per se. These are last refuges, and they'll be staffed by law enforcement personnel only.
And again, don't expect a hot meal here. I mean, just to
Right.
get out of the storm, that's about all we're going to offer you at this point in time. A little closer look at the Miami radar earlier, or I should say earlier last night and over the night, where there's some threats of tornadoes, and we do see some squally weather moving across the Miami metro area.
There have been some gusts a little bit earlier in the evening with some of the squalls that came through to in excess of 60 miles an hour in parts of the Miami area, and anybody in the hurricane warning area needs to still not let their guard down, even though the worst effects may be over the Keys.
Let's take a look at, again, another satellite picture, this encompassing the Gulf. Now, the question is, what about this? Once it hits the Keys, it's not over.
Absolutely not. It's headed out into the Gulf of Mexico. We're still not sure exactly where the next landfall will be along the Gulf Coast, but it will be somewhere, and folks there need to track this hurricane over the next couple days. We may see hurricane watches issued for other parts of the Gulf Coast a little farther down the line.
Okay, thank you, Stu Ostro, for the information, and we thank you for joining us. Reminding we'll keep you up to date on the latest situation as George continues its assault on South Florida this morning. We'll have all the latest, and you can check us out anytime you're away from your TV on the internet at weather.com. Now, Vivian Brown has a look at the rest of the nation's weather, and I suspect it's a bit more tranquil. Vivian?
That's right, Bruce. Good morning. A look at our national satellite picture, and we notice fair skies over a good part of the southeast from Texas into Georgia. But clouds are on the increase in southern Florida. You know why? Because of Hurricane George as it moves closer to the Keys. Other areas of concern, well, we've noticed cloudiness here, southern Ohio into southern Virginia as well as Pennsylvania. We've noticed some higher clouds, though, over the central parts of Missouri. We've had some thunderstorms moving across this region, and notice this lone thunderstorm cell over the southeastern parts of Kansas. A look at a close-up radar coming up in just a moment. Clouds are starting to envelop the Pacific Northwest. We've had the passing showers here this morning, and it's going to be a damp day from Seattle to Portland as we have the onshore flow, winds coming in from the Pacific. But right in here, let's take you on a radar tour, starting with the lighter showers that are moving across the south central parts of Ohio into Pennsylvania. Near Pittsburgh, we have some showers, all pushing off toward the east. And back across St. Louis, just north of the downtown area, some embedded storms here. We've had reports of lightning strikes, so a dangerous scenario this morning in St. Louis. And back across the northern parts of the state, just to north of Columbia.
The eye of Hurricane George is heading for the lower keys of Florida this morning, where conditions are beginning to deteriorate, and there is great concern for the thousands of people who have refused to leave the region. Good morning and welcome to the Weather Center. I'm Will Annan. We are closely tracking the movement of Hurricane George, and we now turn to Bruce Edwards, who's standing by in the Forecast Center for an update.
Thanks, Will, and good morning, everyone. We have a growing hurricane in the Florida Straits, and the effects being felt across South Florida as we speak. Here's a satellite picture of Hurricane George. Appears to be getting better organized, is definitely strengthening a bit over the warm waters of the Florida Straits, and continues to lash South Florida, but the worst is yet to come. Here's the latest observation from the National Hurricane Center as of the update just in from the Hurricane Center. As of 5 a.m., George was centered at 23.8 north, 80.7 west, or approximately 85 miles southeast of Key West, Florida. Now, the maximum sustained winds have grown to 100 miles per hour. So that represents an increase in the winds here, and conditions are favorable for additional strengthening. So we're not done yet with George. It has continued to move on a very stable path since its inception. Continues to move west-northwest at 14. And at that present track and speed, that would place the center of George right near Key West, Florida at about roughly 10 o'clock this morning in that vicinity, seeing that system. And then the entire Keys will be east of the center and would indeed feel the full wrath of George. Central pressure has slipped a little down to 985 millibars. Now, we do have hurricane warnings out for the northeastern Bahamas, or northwestern Bahamas, excuse me, and hurricane watches for western Cuba. Over Central and South Florida, the watches and warnings are posted. Now, we do have hurricane warnings out along the west coast from Longboat Key south, including, of course, all the Keys, and back up the east coast to Deerfield Beach. These are hurricane warnings that are in effect at the present time. Now, from Longboat Key north to Bayport, Florida, and from Deerfield Beach north to Stewart, we have tropical storm warnings in effect at the present time. The winds are being felt along the coast, some gusty winds. We've had reports of gusts as high as 60, 66 miles an hour with some heavier squalls that moved through the Miami metro area earlier this morning. At last report, 44 mile an hour wind gust in West Palm Beach, Florida, about 36 mile an hour gust around Key West, Florida, and again at or approaching tropical storm or exceeding tropical storm gusts. And again, the conditions will get worse before they get better as the winds continue to rip through the region. Now, again, the Keys began feeling the effects of George last night. Here's a look at the situation in Florida City Thursday night, just south of Homestead. You can see the rain bands associated with George are beginning to assault various areas. We had reports of isolated tornadoes, and they are still a possibility over the Florida Keys and parts of South Florida during the next 24 hours as the system continues to pelt down. We're just feeling the effects now. The worst is yet to come. Dr. Steve Lyons has joined us now, our hurricane specialist, and here we go with this storm that maintains some very impressive credentials, so to speak, even while it was over land, and now it's over the warmer waters, and it continues to slowly strengthen.
That's right. Now it's up to a Category 2, and it's just taking aim at Key West, just in another few hours or so before it gets there, and the South Florida Keys. You can see the circulation center of the eye. I'm not even going to draw a dot there. You can see it pretty well in the blue there. Here are the Keys dangling down here, and it's only probably about 4 to 6 hours from landfall on the Key West if it continues on the same track again. A very steady track off to the northwest here, and that will continue the next 48 to 72 hours.
Now, what I've noticed, of course, we've seen all the heavier convection and the higher cloud tops and the nastiest part east of the storm, but if you look at this now, you watch on the western part of the eye, it appears to get a little bit better organized.
That's right. This is an indication that we're closing off an eye wall all the way around the circulation, which is a clear indication from satellite imagery that it's intensifying. Keep in mind that the strongest sector of this hurricane is out in here, and that extends even up into the Miami area. Even as the eye goes by, you're going to have some very strong winds out there. Right now, Fowey Rock, which is just off the coast of Miami here in the Key Biscayne area, about right there more or less, had a wind gust of 73 miles per hour. And so you can see from the radar, here's the circulation center, roughly down in here, moving off this way. It's going to come very close to Key West. The strongest winds will be at Key West and generally south central Keys in this area. But we're going to have some very strong winds in here, gale force winds up to hurricane force gusts. And of course, keep in mind, the strongest winds will occur in conjunction with those heavy rain showers that will be on and off, which will become a little more steady in the metro Miami area.
There's a little closer look of the Miami radar, seeing a squall moving through and out over the Everglades, and some of the gusty winds that push through West Palm, another batch lurking offshore as we speak, continuing to move through. Now, the question is now, again, where is it going to go? It's almost like, well, once it hits the Keys, we're done with it. No.
Not at all. It's going to continue on. Like I mentioned yesterday, when it gets in the Gulf, it's going to have to landfall somewhere, because it rarely will it die away in the Gulf. And our general forecast track takes it somewhere between the extreme western panhandle and New Orleans at 72 hours. And keep in mind, our forecast air is about 300 miles. So if you put a center there, 300 miles on either side would be roughly a forecast air associated with it. So really all the way from extreme northeast Texas all the way around the Florida coast should be keeping a very close eye on this as it moves into the Gulf of Mexico and strengthens.
And we'd just like to remind residents of Key West that have decided to ride out the storm that there are emergency shelters, last refuge shelters in the Keys, in the Upper Keys at Coral Shoals High School, at the Marathon at Stanley Swift Elementary School, and in Key West at Glen Archer Elementary School. And again, no hot coffee, no chicken soup, but you'll get you out of the storm.
That's right. Just be careful getting there. If you do decide to race off to a shelter of last resort, do not drive into deep water, or you get yourself in real big trouble, because the hurricane maximum winds are very shortly going to reach you. So there's already storm surge there, water over many of the roads. So be very careful if you leave your residence right now.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Steve Lyons, our hurricane specialist. Reminder, we'll keep on top of the story, so you can check back with us often throughout the course of the morning, but you can get information anytime on the internet at weather.com. Now let's look at the rest of the nation's weather as we get into this Friday morning with Weather Will Annett.
Thanks a lot, Bruce. And once again, this Weather Center is sponsored by GMC Truck. For much of the country this morning, it is a quiet one, with the exception of course, what is happening over the Florida Keys right now in the southern tip of Florida. A couple of more showers in the Ohio Valley, speeding through Pittsburgh right now over towards Philly. But overall, looks like some quiet weather. A couple of more thunderstorms over Missouri into Illinois this morning. But the southwest and much of the west in general is on the quiet side, with just a few showers noted right now throughout the Pacific Northwest. We'll show you what's happening on our current weather map, and once again, you can see high pressure off the east coast at the present time. Still watching for George beginning to work its way towards the northwest.
morning. It's time now for your tropical update. Now, historically speaking, September is usually a very busy month in the tropics. But even so, it has been unusually active the last few days. And at the present time, we have 4 tropical systems in the Atlantic. First of all, we have Hurricane George spinning up the waters here and right now lifting up towards the Florida Straits. At the same time, though, we have Ivan and Karl farther out towards the Atlantic. And then just to the east of that, we have Hurricane Jeanne just to the west of the Cape Verde Islands. So again, a very active weather pattern for the tropics. The big weather story, of course, though, is Hurricane George. Right now, very strong, a very powerful hurricane, a Category 2 hurricane, packing winds of 100 miles per hour, and it continues to lift towards the west and northwest at some 14 miles per hour. Now, at that rate, if it continues on its present course, that will take it right over the Florida Keys, then eventually reemerge back over the open waters in the eastern Gulf. And that pretty much is the forecast that we're expecting for the next 24 hours or so as it continues to lift off in this general motion. Now, at that rate, we'll definitely see some very squally, very gusty winds and rough conditions throughout southern Florida. And currently, hurricane warnings in effect for most of southern Florida, which does include those of you in the Miami area. You'll likely be seeing some very gusty winds at times approaching hurricane force. So if you haven't already done so, now is the time to start making those final preparations and precautions in southern Florida as those strong winds and locally heavy rain start to come in association with Hurricane George. Right now, we definitely see some very bright convection in association with the hurricane, and some of the strongest winds and some of the worst weather conditions are actually in the eastern semicircle. Here you can see the eye of the hurricane, and again, very, very nasty conditions as all that moisture continues to stream inland. Now, already we've had some of the outer rain bands coming in and pelting some sections in southern Florida, and those of you in Miami, you have been seeing some rain already. You can see the moisture streaming in towards Dade and Broward County. Some heavier rains now approaching West Palm Beach, and again, the showers also picking up in earnest as we head down towards the Florida Keys. As we were mentioning, the official forecast track does take it across the Florida Keys, then back over towards the open waters. And because water temperature is staying very warm throughout this area, certainly conditions are conducive for further strengthening in association with Hurricane George. But George is not the only story in town. We have Tropical Storm Karl. This one with winds of 65 miles per hour. Right now, luckily, it's not affecting any land areas across the region. Then we have Hurricane Ivan. It's packing winds of 80 miles per hour. About the only concern maybe for some shipping interests across the Atlantic. And then just to the east of that, we have Hurricane Jeanne. This one with winds of 105 miles per hour. This one is also moving off towards the west-northwest, and right now not posing any threat to any land areas, and that is certainly great news. Here's another satellite perspective of Hurricane Jeanne as it continues to move towards the west-northwest. Stateside, again, all eyes are focused on Hurricane George. In the meantime, though, we're watching a storm system intensifying across the Midwest. And come later on today, we could see a band of severe weather perhaps developing from Minneapolis through Des Moines, Iowa, even Chicago. Maybe some late-day, big-time thunderstorms rolling across northern Illinois. Stay tuned. We'll have more on Hurricane George coming up in a moment.
The Florida Keys and extreme South Florida brace for the onslaught of Hurricane George. Details plus weather for your morning commute on Weather Center after your local forecast.
Things are slow to change out here in the country. The way we see it, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So when you stop by Cracker Barrel, you'll find things pretty much the way they've always been at an old country store. A big porch for relaxing, a country shop for browsing, and a kitchen serving up the good country cooking America grew up on. And since folks seem to like it just fine that way, we don't anticipate much change. The country's right down the road at Cracker Barrel Old Country Store.
2 tickets, $28. 2 hot dogs, 2 popcorns, and 2 sodas, $18. 1 autographed baseball, $45. Real conversation with 11-year-old son, priceless. There are some things money can't buy. For everything else, there's MasterCard. Accepted all over, even Major League ballparks.